Welcome to the project overview webinar for the I-105 Corridor Sustainability Study, a project of the Southern California Association of Governments. My name is Gary Hamrick with Cambridge Systematics, and I'll be giving a portion of the webinar today, along with...
This is John Overman, also with Cambridge Systematics.
So thank you for viewing this, and we'll start right now. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of background on the project itself, what the study area is, the geographic area we're looking at, the evaluation framework, how we're looking at projects, transportation improvement projects in the study area, tell you about the current and future transportation conditions and other socioeconomic and demographic conditions in the study area, and finally, the process that we're using to recommend improvements for the transportation system. A little bit about the project history and background. SCAG was awarded a Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant in 2016. That led to this effort. And the word sustainable is very important because this is a different kind of project than a typical corridor study that has been done historically that looked at just, for example, the freeway corridor or the freeway itself. So this is a multimodal study looking at all modes of transportation in and near the 105 freeway, going beyond traditional freeway planning and integrating what we call the Caltrans Smart Mobility Framework, as well as including key stakeholders. So there's been a large outreach to key stakeholders, residents, businesses, special interest groups, where we've reached out to them, had meetings and talked to them about their issues and concerns and ideas relating to sustainable transportation in the 105 corridor. And finally, the study leads to recommending multimodal corridor improvements. This map shows the study area as it was ultimately defined. And what it includes, as you can see, is the entirety of the 105 freeway from on the west side near LAX Airport to the east side in Norwalk, almost reaching I-5. And then it crosses 4 freeways, the 405, 110, 710, and 605. It includes 16 cities as well as County of Los Angeles. So it's a study area that basically goes 3 miles all the way around the 105 freeway, inclusive of the freeway and all the modes, arterials, transit, active transportation, bicycling, and walking. This is an effort that, as I mentioned, is different than traditional planning of just looking at the freeway and the capacity and how the freeway operates. And this is an area that Caltrans is actually moving towards overall for their entire system. They're currently preparing a corridor planning guidebook, which would replace the old transportation concept report guidelines. And again, look at more than just the freeway, but look at multimodal transportation opportunities in and near all freeway corridors. That corridor planning guidebook is being developed at this time and being taken to the public for review. In addition, the California Transportation Commission has also developed comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines, which are somewhat higher level, but also recognize that Caltrans is moving towards this type of multimodal planning in their corridors. So if anybody wants to look at those, both of those efforts are available online. And now I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about the evaluation framework.
Thanks, Gary. So in order to evaluate these improvement scenarios, we needed an evaluation framework to evaluate those multimodal corridor improvements. So what we did was we first looked at the project objectives, and these were from the RFP. The objectives of improving multimodal system efficiency, transit ridership, reducing congestion, improving system connectivity and access for non-single occupancy vehicle modes, increasing service to social equity focused or disadvantaged communities, promoting geographic equity throughout the corridor, reducing safety collisions and hazards, improving and preserving system conditions, and improving air quality, public health, and reducing emissions. So with those objectives in mind, we met with the stakeholders and we developed a list of performance measures to both evaluate the existing conditions as well as the proposed improvements. So under mobility and connectivity, you have those same objectives listed on the left side of the screen, and then we have various performance measures or metrics to measure how well a project will address some of these objectives. So for improving transit ridership, the transit mode share or trips is an important metric. We have improved connectivity between modes, increased person throughput, travel time by mode, a measure of a vehicle or person hours of delay, the mode share for high occupancy vehicle trips, and the vehicle hours of delay for trucks. For accessibility and equity, there are three objectives, and the metrics you see on the right measure the access to community resources such as jobs, healthcare, schools, and other key destinations, a measure of the number of households or the percent of households near transit stations, the bicycle facility mileage near fixed route transit as a measure of first last mile connections. Looking at the disadvantaged communities or the social equity focused populations, we have the travel time by mode for these SEF populations, the mode choice, as well as the SEF households near high quality transit stations. And then finally, the geographic distribution of investments. On safety, the objective of reducing safety collisions and hazards, the metrics we're looking at are the serious and fatal injuries by mode, as well as any active transportation hazards, recognizing that those are very vulnerable roadway users. On the state of good repair objective, we have a performance metric to look at the transit assets past their useful life, as well as the pavement condition index. And finally, the sustainability, there are a number of objectives or a number of potential performance measures. With improving air quality and public health, we have access to parks and recreation, the bicycle and walk mode share or trips, households near major roadways as a public health concern, the monetary benefits saved due to increased physical activity, so the public health benefits of increased bicycle and walking. On reducing emissions, we look at vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, the criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases, and also the single occupant vehicle mode share. Within the I-105 study area. So first off, we have the existing land use. So within the corridor, it's primarily single-family residential. It's about 40% of the land area within the study area. Although there is a large percentage of industrial land uses, about 13% industrial, including areas around LAX, the supporting industries. Gardena and Hawthorne, Santa Fe Springs have large portions of industrial land use. And the single-family residential is that lighter orange color. You're looking at employment density. There's the most dense areas for high employment are on the eastern and western edges of the study area, and these do overlap a bit with the industrial areas. So you have high concentrations of jobs around LAX and El Segundo and Manhattan Beach employment centers to the south. You have concentrations in Gardena, Downey, and Santa Fe Springs on the eastern end of the corridor, but it's spread out from the east to the west in terms of employment density. The mix of jobs is similar to the county profile, but there is a higher percentage of transportation-related jobs and lower business and professional services jobs, given its proximity to LAX. Excuse me. So looking at the population density, the reverse is true. Fewer dense residential areas on the eastern and western edge of the study area and higher concentrations of populations within the central part of the corridor. The total population of the study area is about 1.4 million, about 14% of the county population. And you can see where those the higher populations are concentrated. Looking at median household income, again, we see some disparity between the eastern and western edges of the corridor and the central part of the study area. Higher incomes to the east and the west, with lower incomes in South LA and the surrounding neighborhoods. It's generally a lower income than the county average, over 50% below $50,000 annually. 21% of the households below the federal poverty level. And also, it's a heavily minority population. It's 90% non-white within the study area. So turning to transit ridership, first we have a map of the rail ridership boardings at rail stations. So there are two metro rail lines within the study area, the green line, which runs east-west, and the blue line that runs north-south. The highest daily boardings are at the Willowbrook Rosa Parks Station, which is a transfer station between the blue and the green lines. You also see high activity toward the east and the west ends of the green line. Norwalk Station, which is the terminus and also has a large parking lot, as well as the Aviation LAX at the west end of the green line. The green and blue lines carry about 10% of the metro daily boardings in the study area, but they have seen loss in ridership over the last 4 or 5 years. Actually, over the last 6 years, the green line has lost 28% of their daily boardings, and the blue line is down 18%. Looking at metro bus riderships, so this is a map of bus boardings by stop. You can see where some of the concentrations are. Kind of north of the green line is where you see most of the boardings, and I'll show you on the next map that that's sort of a function of Metro's service area as well. But in terms of the bus boardings per stop, you have rapid lines that have the highest productivity. They generally run north-south, and they have the highest boardings per stop. 754 and on Vermont, the 757 on Western have pretty good ridership per stop, as well as the Silver Line that runs on the 110 freeway. And complementing Metro service in this area are the muni operators. So there are a number of municipal transit operators that cover a lot of the areas south of the 105 freeway. Some of the notable routes, Long Beach Transit, Santa Monica Big Blue Bus kind of comes into the study area, Torrance Transit, Norwalk Transit, Beach City Transit, and LADOT all serve a number of riders per day. Finally, we looked at bicycle and walk mode share. This map shows the commute mode share for bicyclists. There's geographic variability in the percentage of people who are residents who bike to work in the study area. Overall, it's about less than 1% of all residents commute to work by bike, and that's a little bit lower than the county average. But you can see there are some areas that have much higher than 1% mode share. This map also shows that there's a limited number of Class 2 and Class 1 bike facilities, so bike paths and bike lanes in the study area. So you see some room for improvement there.
Okay, so as I mentioned, this is a multimodal corridor study, and John talked about transit, and we'll talk about active transportation. In addition, we are looking at the freeway itself and the arterial system, and this slide and the next slide show the current conditions on the freeway itself. The red areas are areas of high congestion, in this case during the AM peak hour, peak period. You can see the westbound direction is highly congested during the morning peak, while the eastbound is actually relatively free flow. And the next slide will show the opposite, with the PM peak being highly congested in the eastbound direction and some congestion in the westbound. We did find, looking at the freeway, that overall the PM peak is the worst time period when you look at both directions and the total amount of congestion. And looking at this slide, you can see there is, in fact, a lot of congestion on the freeway itself, certainly in the eastbound direction. Looking at the arterial system, We use the arterial performance management tool of LA Metro to look at information such as the current speeds on the arterial system, where the speeds are slow, where people are experiencing a lot of congestion, either mid-block on arterials or at intersections or both. And we're able to look at from speeds, the travel times and the vehicle hours of delay. And then we can pick out the arterials that have the highest congestion or the worst conditions. And those are shown by the red and the sort of orange colored lines. And then we've pulled out those streets to identify which ones are currently experiencing the most congestion. In this case, including Lakewood, Bellflower, Sepulveda on the west side, Imperial, Rosecrans, and Artesia come to the top as the arterials with the highest amount of delay that you would experience driving on them. Looking at system preservation and how the condition of the freeway and arterial system is today, there's actually an interesting dichotomy. When you look at the freeways and arterials versus the freeway only, we find the pavement condition for the freeway is actually overall quite good, whereas the arterial system has a lot of mileage that has poor conditions, more potholes, more deteriorated pavement condition. And that's actually something that we did expect when before we looked at the data. Caltrans does a good job of keeping up the freeway system generally. This is one of the newer freeways in the system, whereas the arterial system is subject to a lack of funding. A lot of cities simply don't have enough money to keep up their arterial system conditions the way they would like. And that's reflected in this graph that show almost 60% of the combined freeway and arterial mileage being deteriorated and in poor condition. We've been looking at the bridge conditions, looking at data from the U.S. Department of Transportation. Overall, the bridge conditions in the study are generally good, and only less than 1% fall in the lowest category of condition, which would make them eligible for federal replacement funding. Those are shown by the red dots. And in fact, since this map was created, a couple of these red dots have gone away when those bridges have been replaced or repaired. And so there's really only a couple of locations that are considered to be very poor. The rest are in the generally good category. Looking at the collision rates on the I-105 freeway and comparing it to the countywide average for LA County, the 105 freeway has a slightly worse history of collisions than the countywide average. As you can see here, it's in the middle with the red bar. It has a higher collision rate than several of the freeways in the county, lower than a few, probably indicative of the fact that it is a relatively highly congested route over its entire area, which leads to more collisions. We've also looked at collisions between or with bicycles and pedestrians, and we've mapped those. And you can see in this map that there's a higher concentration of bike and pedestrian collisions kind of in the mid-corridor area around the 110 freeway in the South LA area, as well as some other pockets such as in the Lawndale, Gardena, Hawthorne area, and then portions of Compton. But the largest concentration, as you can see by the darker colors and then larger number of locations of actual collisions, are in sort of the central corridor. We suspect that there's a higher amount of bicycling activity in this area where the income level is lower and people are probably relying on bikes for transportation more so. And looking at similar data for truck collisions, this shows where the preponderance of the truck collisions are occurring. In this case, in the Gardena area, which has a higher concentration of industrial, along the eastern portion of the corridor near Paramount, and then out in Santa Fe Springs, which does, again, have a very high concentration of warehousing and industrial activity, and therefore truck activity reflective of the collisions that are occurring relating to trucks. And on the freeway itself, the black dots along the freeway are the truck collisions. There are a much larger number east of the 710 freeway where you have a larger number of port trucks that are going east to then go north and out to the Inland Empire.
So we're going to turn over to the future conditions and present some of the similar data from the future conditions. However, it's limited to what is forecastable or easy to model. So we're first going to look at the land use and demographics again. The employment growth in the study area is concentrated in areas that already have pretty high concentrations of employment, with the exception of in Inglewood. There's a large tract there, which is the old Hollywood racetrack that's being developed into an NFL stadium and retail and entertainment complex. But for the most part, you have areas that already have high employment concentrations, such as around LAX and El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, and Santa Fe Springs, that see the greatest amount of total job growth. Employment in the study area is projected to increase by 15% between 2016 and 2040. This is slightly lower than the county average, but still significant. I'd also note that, looking just at the city of El Segundo, it has the highest growth rate at about 30%. This only accounts for 9% of the employment growth in the area. Whereas in the city of Los Angeles, which doesn't look very dark on this map, has 20% of the jobs in 2016, but accounts for 40% of the projected growth. So there's quite a bit of growth in the South Los Angeles neighborhoods. It's just spread out. Looking at the population growth, again, you have areas that already have higher population density that sees the greatest amount of growth. Again, you see that tract in Inglewood sees a large amount of growth because of the new residential being built there. Also, the population is projected to increase by about 7% in the study area, which is significantly lower than the county average of around 13%. The majority of the population growth will occur in just 3 cities. The city of Los Angeles, which accounts for 29% of the growth, Inglewood, that's 12% of the growth, and Southgate, that's 14% of the growth. Looking at transit, these are some of the Measure M funded transit projects, major capital projects in the study area. From west to east, you have the Lincoln Boulevard BRT, which is a later stage project on the Measure M expenditure plan list. You have the Sepulveda Pass corridor, which is eventually planned to lead all the way down to LAX. You have the Crenshaw line, which is in construction, should be completed in a couple of years. You have the Vermont corridor, either BRT or light rail. And then moving east, you have the West Santa Ana branch of light rail corridor and the Green Line extension to Norwalk, to the Metrolink station there.
Along the freeway, we've used the SCAG travel demand model to look at what might happen in terms of growth in traffic. And we see here that the expected growth in traffic on the freeway itself is around 5%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but as shown earlier, the freeway is already highly congested, so that 5% can actually translate into significantly more delays when you're traveling on the freeway, even with this relatively small amount of growth. And then looking at truck volume growth, the proportion of truck growth is actually a little bit higher, and it's especially high to the east of the 710 freeway. And again, that's reflective of growth in port truck trip making going up the 710, using the 105 to access the 605 and then go further east. But we do have a fair amount of truck trip, these are large heavy duty truck trips, growth that will occur on the freeway itself. These maps show the current conditions, and wherever you see red, that's a congested location. On the screen on top is today, more or less, on the bottom is out to the future year, 2040. You don't see a lot of difference. There are areas where the freeway is expected to get somewhat worse, but again, this is the PM peak period, and it's already pretty congested, with one exception going westbound, but for the most part, it will get somewhat worse, and you'd see a similar pattern in the AM peak as well. And finally, looking at arterial system growth, we again looked at how much We have an anticipated increase in volume on the arterial system. The red lines are the larger amount of growth on individual arterials, and we see expected larger amounts of growth kind of on the west side along Aviation, Sepulveda, and then through the Harbor Freeway 110 freeway corridor. A lot of those arterials are expected to have higher amount of growth, and that could possibly be due to traffic that wants to get off, again, the congested 110 freeway and use arterial streets.
So taking these existing conditions and future conditions into consideration, I'm going to talk a bit about what the next steps are and how we're turning this into actual recommendations of improvement. But a bit about the process. So when we're thinking about scenarios, the first thing we want to do is to review existing studies and compile all the project ideas out there. We then compare them to our evaluation framework, which we discussed earlier, and then split these scenarios into near-term, mid-term, and long-term improvement scenarios. So I'm going to talk a bit about where we are in that process right now. So we've collected project ideas. This is the list as of a few weeks ago was over 500 projects, active transportation, arterial, goods movement, highway, and transit projects. This list came again from existing planning studies as well as meeting with the stakeholders, cities, and other agencies in the corridor to look at the project ideas. And then also comparing this list to our existing conditions and future conditions analysis and see what's missing and where the deficiencies are. The step one of the actual evaluation is that framework we discussed earlier. So we established our performance-based framework in the early parts of the project. And that's going to be important for the next step, which is to actually provide an initial scoring of each project based on the project type. So you can't see this on the screen, but these are all those performance measures that were on the last slide, and how a project of each type might score qualitatively based on our performance framework. But we didn't want to leave it there. We wanted to provide a more detailed scoring for each project. So this is where we actually look at the existing conditions and see, based on the project's location and the type of project, how it might benefit the overall corridor. So where is this project located? Does it address a known or an existing deficiency, such as areas of high delay, safety issues, physical barriers, connectivity issues? Does it serve a higher employment or population density? And also just the proximity to the corridor. Is this really a project that's going to benefit the multimodal movement along the 105 corridor? Does it connect to other modes such as rail stations or freeway on-ramps, bike routes, etc.? So all these extra factors that we're considering will add to the overall project's score. So taking that all together is what we're doing right now. So we've done that step, and we're packaging the different improvements into these improvement scenarios. So this is happening in November of 2018. We're also gathering feedback on the project and the process right now. You can provide feedback online at bit.ly/SCAG-I105 You can email the project team at any time. It's i105css@scag.ca.gov. And then we'll be issuing a draft and final report in early next year. So if you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to email the project team, provide survey online, or provide your feedback online at the survey, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for listening to this webinar. The report will actually provide a lot more detailed information. Today we've given an overview of the work that has been conducted, but there's a lot more actual detailed technical work that went into both the existing conditions and the future conditions and the identification of project improvements. So please reach out to us as you have ideas about the corridor and improvements, and please fill out the survey if you can. Thank you.